A little while ago, I got into a rather heated argument when a new Fusion announcement was posted in a chat and someone said, "This'll save us." No, this was Telegram, so it got a bit confused and we ended up arguing across each other. But there's a very important principle I feel needs to be explained here, and it's that fancy new technology is not going to be our salvation. We will need new technology in the future, but in order to save us from the environmental crisis staring us right in the face, we don't need new technology. What we need is a quote from a problematic historical figure. Action this day. Now, fusion is important. I've been keeping track of progress on ITER, and I think achieving usable fusion power will be a transformative breakthrough in 30 to 50 years. It might have escaped your notice, but our need to solve the climate crisis is imminent. We don't have 30 to 50 years. That's not to say we should stop investing in it. We're going to need it later as a long-term solution that will unlock new horizons for humanity, and given the timescales involved, it's an important technology to continue developing. Fusion is the power of the future, but only the power of the present can actually save us from the crisis. The narrative for literally decades now has been, in the future, we will have fancy technology that will make the problem go away. All we have to do is sort our garbage, and all will be well. Meanwhile, we've kept on doing the same thing we always have. Kept on pumping out industrial CO2, kept on driving internal combustion vehicles, kept on heating our homes with gas, and cooling them with coal and later gas-fired electricity. We've shifted huge amounts of our logistics from efficient rail to inefficient trucks, and just-in-time logistics have only driven that reliance through the roof. And that's not the only thing that shifted from rail either, given the rise of short-haul air travel. But given that it's been decades, where are those fancy technologies? Funny story, they're already here. To be really honest, we didn't need a whole lot of new technology, but all the fancy stuff people have claimed we would need is here already. Older photovoltaics weren't great, but solar thermal has been viable for decades and modern PV is excellent. The major advances in wind power have largely been in scale. Hydropower was already mature technology by the middle of last century. Of course, renewables do need some kind of load balancing, and there have been advances there over the last few decades, but those mainly focus on footprint. Pumped storage has been around for longer than people have been talking about climate change. Fission, for all its big scary vibes, has been with us for nearly 80 years now, and generating power for 7 decades. Battery technology has seen significant advances, which are now so mature they're not only ubiquitous in our daily lives, you can buy one-use items with lithium batteries in them. Electric cars have been around for longer than petrol cars, and combining them with lithium batteries and charging infrastructure is currently revolutionizing cars. Then there's smart tech, using computers and data to improve efficiencies in ways that would have been impossible in the 80s. But even fairly dumb thermostats still do the job pretty well. Techniques for designing homes with passive heating and cooling have been known about for centuries, but I've never lived in one. The technology we all thought was going to be needed to change the world and defeat climate change is already here. In some cases, was always here. In others, has come and matured while we've all been looking wistfully over the horizon. So, that's climate change solved then, right? Well, you see, it's all very well to have the technology, but if all you're going to do is put it on a pedestal and go, ooh, at it, then it's not really of much use. You obviously have to actually use that technology, and that's really where the problem is. We've had electric cars for nearly a century and a half, though they've honestly only become practical in the last decade. What made them practical? Partially the lithium batteries, but I think people overlook the infrastructure rolled out to support them. That's the real key to the puzzle. Internal combustion vehicles have an extensive, established infrastructure, and we needed to make a push to get the electric equivalent built out. That's going to be a theme here. Maybe you don't like Tesla, and so blindly write off all electric cars and anything related because it's not your favorite technology, like, say, trolley buses or something. There are a lot of people who live in places where a car is necessity for modern life, either because that's how the built environment has been arranged or because they live in low density rural areas that cannot support public transport. You can't change that overnight, so electric cars are part of the solution, as are electric buses and electric trucks. The infrastructure doesn't support getting everyone to cycle or take the bus or the train, and infrastructure takes time and money to develop. You also can't just forcibly uproot people to denser areas. We can, however, tweak existing infrastructure. We can at least take some of those car-oriented places and deploy low-effort infrastructural adjustments to make walking, cycling, and taking the bus easier and safer, which at least get those people out of their cars. And yes, that means electric buses, whether trolley or battery. We can find ways to make rail transport work with just-in-time logistics. And again, the technology for greening rail transport exists and is mature. Electric trains have been in use for almost a century and a half. High-speed rail can beat air travel, and even decent non-high-speed services can in the right circumstances. HSR does require expensive infrastructure, but standard rail improvements can be much easier. Any discussion of rail infrastructure, of course, brings us on to the reason why we don't deploy the technology we have to solve the imminent problem. We put a lot more money into roads than rails, and nobody wants to be the person making the decision to reverse that. I could keep going. I could talk about mass rollouts of wind and solar and making sacrifices to enable large-scale pump storage for load balancing, but that would be expensive and controversial. I could talk about getting rid of plastic bottles in favour of aluminium cans or reusable glass bottles like I used to. That would reduce petrol profits and push the burden of dealing with packaging waste back onto the soft drink companies. I could talk about just ploughing government money into home thermal improvements and switching over to efficient heat pump technology. Again, something mature that's been around for decades and we just don't use. I could talk about just banning cryptocurrency. But there wouldn't be any point. I'd just be labouring it. Technology will not save us. It won't save us because it doesn't matter what new technology we're waiting on. It doesn't matter what new technology we get. If we don't use it, it can't save us. What will save us is using the technology we already have. Often what stops us doing this is infrastructure and other adoption costs, vested interests, and apathy. Infrastructure and adoption costs are kind of obvious. As a society, we could pull together to overcome those, but of course, we've spent the last 40 years smashing the state's ability to do that, while also driving wealth inequality that prevents people either organizing on a community level or being willing to make a personal sacrifice. Apathy represents the lack of personal or political will to do anything, and also the fact that for a corporation, the only thing that matters is profits, and so getting a corporation to change its approach can be very difficult. Some people just don't care, and often our political systems don't support our politicians caring either, unless enough people put pressure on them to change something. If they don't care, then they don't do anything, and if they don't do anything, it can be difficult to force those who don't care or actively don't want to change to do something. Of course, the final element is vested interests, and you probably knew this already, but your politicians care a lot more about those than they do about you. Vested interests will buy apathy if it suits them, and will often go out of their way to shut down action if it disrupts their status quo. More corrupt, centralized, and elitist systems are more prone to this than otherwise, but unfortunately, for a lot of the West, that's what we've been voting for over the last few decades. I don't want to finish this in a downer, so let's remember that we have the technology. We can do it. We can save ourselves. We just need to take action, and to somehow force our governments to take action. Speaking of taking action, dislike this video because you're an oil executive. Leave a comment telling me I'm deluded because you read an economics paper about how renewables will destroy the energy industry. Watch some of my other terribly misguided videos and then subscribe so you can keep an eye on me. Hit the bell because you understand the beauty of YouTube's disruptive algorithm. And send me money ironically at the Ko-fi link below.